Everyone who saw Captain Mara Collins that evening thought she was just another calm professional guiding another routine flight through another American night. She walked through the Atlanta terminal with the kind of confidence that didn't ask for attention. Her uniform fit neatly, her stride stayed measured, and her expression carried the gentle steadiness passengers trusted without ever questioning why. To strangers, she looked exactly like what they needed, a reliable human behind metal wings and complicated machines. No one could have guessed how much history she carried beneath that quiet smile, or how much she'd sworn never to revisit it. The airport buzzed like a restless hive. Rolling suitcases clicked over polished floors, boarding announcements echoed through wide halls, and tired travelers clung to coffee cups and headphones. Mara blended into it all, slipping through that soft chaos like someone who had mastered the art of invisibility while still being in command. She greeted the gate crew warmly, exchanged a friendly nod with the ground engineer, then stepped aboard the aircraft where the smell of jet fuel, recycled air, and faintly nostalgic cabin cleaner wrapped around her like a familiar coat. Inside the cockpit, she settled into the left seat. The world outside blurred into rain-dark tarmac and runway lights stretching into infinite black. Beside her sat Ethan Ward, younger, promising, sharp, but still tethered to the handbook like it was law carved into stone. He admired Mara like most co-pilots did, though he didn't quite understand why her composure seemed heavier than experience alone. He only knew she carried something unspoken. "Storm cells building north of us," he said lightly while flipping switches. "Dispatch says we'll thread them, just turbulence, nothing dramatic tonight." Mara gave that same small smile she always gave when someone called the sky predictable. "The sky never agrees with dispatch," she answered softly. The aircraft rolled away from the gate, engines humming like enormous beasts waking beneath metal skin. Passengers buckled in, unaware how thin the line was between ordinary travel and unimaginable danger. The plane lifted, slicing into thick clouds, swallowed by darkness and rain. Inside, warm cabin lights glowed golden. The seatbelt sign chimed. Everything looked, felt, and sounded normal. Then it happened. A burst of static hissed through the cockpit speakers. Not the usual chatter, not the usual frequency. It was raw, desperate, cracking with panic, a human voice shaking. "Send help, please send help, anyone." The sound punched through the cabin like a fist. Ethan snapped his head toward the radio, frowning hard. "That isn't ATC," he said. Mara's breath stalled for a fraction of a second. She recognized the tone of that voice, not the person but the emotion, the voice of someone seconds from losing everything. She leaned forward slightly. "Say again," she spoke into the mic, calm but urgent. "Repeat your transmission." Nothing answered, only static, then a faint, trembling repeat. "Send help, please." Then silence. Ethan swallowed. "Probably interference," he muttered, already uncomfortable. "Wrong channel bleeding through, we should report it and move on." But something inside Mara tightened. Because she'd heard that voice before. Not that person, not that exact tone, but that helpless, breaking sound had lived in the back of her skull for years. She heard it when she woke up at night. She heard it when the world got quiet. She heard it every time someone mentioned storms, mountains, remote flights, and government resupply missions that officially never existed. Long ago, before airlines and smiling passengers and safe terminals, Mara flew missions in places where no rescue ever came unless someone broke rules to make it happen. She'd seen aircraft break apart against mountainsides. She'd heard pilots beg for help that arrived too late. She, once sworn she would never be the reason help didn't come again. Ethan noticed her hands weren't moving back to routine tasks. "Captain," he asked carefully, "procedurally, we just notify the authorities. They'll coordinate rescue assets. That's how it works here." He meant in the normal world. The world with memos, procedures, liability, and reputation. But Mara had also lived in the world where storms laughed at procedures and injuries bled faster than paperwork traveled. In the world where wait meant die. She didn't answer immediately. She just stared ahead as coordinates flashed onto one of the side screens, coordinates that didn't belong to any scheduled commercial aircraft flight log. Her chest tightened. "Someone pinged an emergency beacon," she murmured. Ethan exhaled sharply. "Yeah, and rescue teams can handle." "Storm interference will slow them," she said quietly. "We're closest, we're fastest, and someone down there isn't sending a routine message." In her mind, she wasn't in a commercial cockpit anymore. She was back in rugged terrain, wind screaming, hands gripping controls while a bleeding soldier gasped in the back. She remembered the order in her headset telling her to stand down. She remembered disobeying anyway. She remembered the face of a young medic who hugged her afterward with tears in his eyes simply because he was alive. That memory didn't haunt her. The ones where she hadn't made it in time did. Lightning crawled across the sky outside like veins of light ripping open darkness. Thunder murmured in the bones of the aircraft. Ethan looked at her like he already knew what she was thinking. "Captain, if we deviate." "I know," she whispered. "They could lose their jobs. They could lose their licenses. They could face hearings, investigations, endless scrutiny. But someone down there could lose their life." The radio crackled again. A faint broken breath. A sound like someone trying not to cry. "Please." The word barely existed, just a ghost of sound. Mara closed her eyes for half a second. Every rule, every risk, every consequence stood on one side. On the other, humanity. She opened her eyes. And they were steady again. She wrapped her fingers around the yoke, not dramatically, not heroically, simply like someone who understood what must be done. She nudged the aircraft gently off its charted path. Ethan stared at her disbelief, and admiration wrestling across his face. "You're really doing this," he whispered. Mara didn't look at him. "If that were your family down there," she said quietly, "would you want the nearest capable pilot to wait for permission?" He didn't answer. Because they both knew. Far below in a storm-dark valley no tourist brochure ever mentioned, something or someone was out of time. The airline expected compliance. The system expected obedience. Paperwork expected signatures. People expected convenience. Mara Collins had spent a lifetime not being what people expected. And as the aircraft slipped deeper into storm clouds and the world outside grew more dangerous, more violent, more unforgiving, only one truth remained. She was going to find whoever called for help. Unless something found her first. And high above the United States, inside a jet full of unsuspecting passengers who had no idea they were flying toward the edge of impossible, the cockpit fell silent. Right before every warning light on the panel began to glow, the cockpit transformed in an instant from a calm command center into a storm of blinking warnings, insistent chimes, and red-laced alerts cutting across dark panels like scars. Ethan's breath hitched. His training told him to prioritize aircraft safety first, always the aircraft first. But there was nothing ordinary about this situation. Nothing logical about ignoring a distress beacon screaming from somewhere below. And nothing calm about the storm-pressing claws of wind against the plane, as if the sky itself wanted them gone. "Systems spike from the turbulence," Ethan muttered, reassuring himself as much as her. "She's strong, she'll handle it." Mara didn't respond. She checked engine readouts. They weren't failing, but they weren't comfortable. The atmosphere was disturbed, weather stacked in violent layers, heated air rising against cold currents, tearing stability apart like paper. The aircraft didn't like where they were heading. Every system made that brutally clear. But they were already committed. Below them stretched an American wilderness very few passengers ever saw. Jagged mountains slicing sky. Black forest lands without lights. No comforting highways, no suburban glow, no cities humming with the illusion of safety. Just ruthless geography and a storm hungry enough to swallow metal. Lightning ripped across the horizon, illuminating the cockpit in ghost-white flashes. Something about this didn't feel like just another storm. The distress beacon wasn't random. The coordinates weren't near commercial air routes. Ethan zoomed in their navigation display, watching terrain warnings bloom like bleeding red patches across the screen. The beacon belonged to a medical transport. That alone turned fear into urgency. "Medical flight," Ethan whispered, voice suddenly smaller. "Captain, if they went down, someone's not just injured. Someone's already fragile. This could be." "Life or death," Mara finished softly. He nodded. The decision she'd already made hardened. They cut deeper through the storm. Wind slammed the fuselage with the brute strength of a world refusing to be controlled. The cabin behind them shook. Drinks trembled. A baby cried somewhere. A passenger gasped. Flight attendants exchanged glances they tried to hide behind professional smiles. In the cockpit, calm was mandatory, but calm wasn't natural now. "Dispatch is requesting status," Ethan said, reading texts appearing across the screen. "They noticed deviation. They're not happy." "Tell them we're responding to a distress beacon," Mara replied, voice even. "Tell them that's not negotiable." He hesitated only a second before transmitting. There was a pause. Then a wall of angry response text filled the screen. "Return to route immediately. Unauthorized deviation. Not your responsibility. You are endangering passengers." Mara stared at the words. "Passengers? Human lives up here. Human lives down there." Everyone always counted the lives they could see. Nobody ever considered the ones slipping away in unseen places. "Captain," Ethan murmured, lowering his voice even though no one but the two of them could hear, "we could lose everything for this." Mara looked ahead at the dark. She thought of losing sleep years ago, losing people she couldn't reach in time, losing nights to guilt. "Maybe," she said quietly, "but they could lose everything too." He didn't argue again. Thunder boomed so close the aircraft seemed to vibrate from the inside out. The jet rolled slightly with a violent gust. Ethan caught the movement, hands flying across controls. Rain hammered the windshield. Visibility fell to near nothing. They were flying blind toward danger. Exactly the kind of flight Mara had promised herself she'd never return to. Exactly the kind of flight fate clearly wasn't finished giving her. "Terrain system reads narrowing valleys," Ethan reported. "This storm is building a southern wall. If we commit further, turning out will be tough." Meaning they'd get one chance to make this right. Or one chance to regret everything too late. The cockpit crackled. For a moment both froze. Static. Then, a faint, raw breath. Not a sentence, not a message. Just a human existence clinging on. "Alive." The voice wasn't technically identifiable, but the emotion was. Terror. Pain. Exhaustion. Myra clenched her jaw. "Hold on," she whispered, not into the microphone, just into the universe itself. "We're coming." As if hearing her, the world outside howled louder. Lightning flashed again, this time close enough to illuminate something below for half a heartbeat. A violent blur of forest, ridge lines, shadows carved like wounds. Ethan leaned toward the glass even though he knew it wouldn't help. They were entering terrain no commercial aircraft should ever willingly flirt with. "Captain, altitude risk increases with every mile," Ethan warned. "We need ATC assistance to map terrain." "ATC is busy telling us to turn back," Mara replied. "We'll map it ourselves." He swallowed. This was no textbook situation anymore. This was raw flying. This was belief in instinct and experience. belief in engine strength and human willpower, belief in the idea that when someone screams for help, someone answers even when it's not convenient, safe, or expected. The cabin interphone chimed. Mara exhaled before answering, "Flight deck." It was the lead attendant, voice controlled but tight. "Captain, turbulence is scaring people, and the plane, it feels like something's wrong. Can we reassure passengers?" Mara closed her eyes briefly. Truth would cause panic. Silence would cause fear. A lie would insult the situation. She spoke steady. "Tell them we're managing weather conditions. Keep everyone seated, secure the cabin, and trust us." There was a short pause. Then softly, "Yes, Captain. Trust us." Two words that carried weight heavier than the aircraft itself. They broke through another violent layer of storm. The plane dipped. Someone probably screamed behind them. Ethan tightened his grip. Mara steadied. Then finally, the terrain radar stopped showing just warnings. It showed something. A cluster of jagged readouts. An area where the storm turbulence thrashed harder. And right beneath the chaos, a beacon. Weak. Blinking. Fading. There, Ethan breathed. Mara saw it too. She adjusted heading. Their world narrowed. There was no route now, no highway in the sky, just instinct and technology struggling to interpret a chaotic atmosphere. The aircraft shook with the fury of air pushing against metal, refusing their presence. They pressed deeper anyway. A flickering light appeared in the distance. Not cabin light. Not lightning. Something else. A pulsive, faint, artificial glow. "Is that?" Ethan whispered. Mara didn't answer. She watched. For 3 seconds the light pulsed through rain. Then it faded. Then it blinked again, slower, weaker. The distress beacon. They were close. Too close. Warnings began screaming. "Terrain, pull up, terrain." Mara ignored every automated voice screaming at her to save the aircraft by abandoning the people below. She didn't do it recklessly. She did it with knowledge, control, purpose. She lowered slightly. Enough to see. Not enough to die. Wind clawed. Rain drowned. Lightning tore. The sky roared around them. "There," Ethan suddenly shouted, eyes widening. Through sheets of rain, through darkness, through chaos. Something glinted against rock. Metal. Broken. Twisted. A shape on a ridge where no plane should ever be. A wreck. Dark. Motionless. No runway. No clearing. No hope. Mara's throat tightened. For a split second, she wasn't a pilot. She was just human, looking at tragedy before it officially became one. "Do you see movement?" Ethan whispered, barely breathing. Mara squinted. The storm surged. The light vanished. Silence swallowed the cockpit for a heartbeat, even though alarms still screamed. The beacon flickered again. Weak. Desperate. Alive. But only for now. Mara exhaled, slow and steady, every decision of her life funneling into one truth. They found them. Now came the impossible part. Getting close enough to matter. And as the aircraft trembled under the merciless storm, as the ridge disappeared again beneath rain and darkness, as the emergency beacon dimmed toward silence, the cockpit lights flickered. Then half the instrument panel went black. The cockpit plunged into partial darkness. Red warning lights glowed like warning eyes in the gloom, flickering as systems struggled against the storm's ferocity. Ethan's jaw tightened. "We've lost half the avionics," he muttered, voice tense. "Some instruments offline. Terrain mapping might not hold." Mara's hands never wavered from the yoke. Every muscle tightened and relaxed in a controlled rhythm, as if her body remembered instinctively what her brain had once engraved in long hours of missions no one knew existed. Her eyes flicked between the failing displays, the storm outside, and the coordinates of the fading beacon. "Stay calm," she whispered. "We're not leaving anyone behind." Ethan exhaled shakily. "Captain, this isn't a standard approach. You know that. We're flying into unknown terrain without full instruments. One wrong move." "Then we make it right anyway," Mara interrupted, her voice low, measured, but sharp as lightning slicing the clouds outside. "We're the closest and they're alive. That's all that matters." Below, the storm tore at the mountains like a living predator. Rain fell in sheets, blinding, relentless. Wind gusts twisted the plane, threatening to rip it from control, testing every microsecond of Mara's skill. The faint glow of the beacon flashed intermittently below, almost teasing them, sometimes visible, sometimes swallowed entirely by black. Mara guided the jet closer, hugging the mountainside with a precision most pilots never needed to master. Her hands moved over the controls with a surgeon's grace, compensating for the failing instruments, reading the wind, anticipating turbulence as if she could feel it through the frame of the plane. Then a low groan vibrated through the fuselage. The engines protested as if aware of the impossible task she demanded. Ethan's eyes widened. Engine fluctuation, one miscalculation. "I know," Mara said, jaw tight. "Just keep it steady." A flash of lightning illuminated a thin ridge below. There it was, a wrecked medical transport, crumpled metal and twisted fuselage barely distinguishable from the jagged rocks. Mara exhaled silently. Her stomach dropped at the sight of what could have been death. But movement. Faint, trembling human movement. Pilot Ethan whispered, "They're alive." Mara nodded without a word, throat tight. The storm had no mercy, and neither did the terrain. To land or even hover nearby was beyond conventional aviation. She had one chance to save lives, one chance to rewrite fate. She adjusted their angle, descending carefully, threading the storm as the wind tore at the aircraft like invisible hands trying to push them away. Cabin lights flickered behind them. Passengers murmured, unaware of the gravity outside their window shades. Flight attendants braced themselves, sensing tension even if they didn't understand why. The beacon flashed again. Someone was signaling desperately, weakly, a pulse that almost seemed to communicate, "Please hurry." Mara tracked it, careful to balance descent speed and lateral control. Every instinct screamed caution, every memory screamed urgency. And then it happened. A sudden updraft slammed the aircraft, tilting it dangerously toward the mountain. The yoke nearly slipped from her hands. Ethan gripped his side of the controls, panic rising like a tide. "We're too low, we can't hold this." Mara's teeth clenched. Her mind raced, calculating trajectories, wind speed, lift capacity, weight distribution, all in milliseconds. A lifetime of impossible maneuvers condensed into a heartbeat. "Trust me," she said, not to him, not even to herself, to the unknown lives below. The aircraft trembled violently. Warning sirens screamed. Red lights flashed. Passengers screamed inside their own private bubbles of fear. Outside, the mountains were blurred streaks of gray and black. Lightning split the sky. Mara adjusted flaps, nudged throttle, banked slightly. The jet responded like a living creature under her hands. For a moment, the world narrowed to one point, the faint blinking of the beacon. And then she saw it. The pilot of the downed medical transport, half exposed through torn fuselage, struggling against broken harnesses, drenched, blood streaking his uniform. Beside him, a patient strapped into a stretcher gasped shallowly, eyes barely open, terrified, helpless. Ethan's voice cracked. "They won't last much longer." Mara's eyes burned. She didn't answer with words. She adjusted descent again, weaving between gusts and peaks, every movement calculated to avoid catastrophe. The plane's skin vibrated violently with wind, every panel shrieking under pressure. Then the beacon flickered once more, stronger this time, almost pleading, as if aware of their presence. Mara took a deep breath. "We're here," she said quietly. "Hold on." A sudden gust hit like a battering ram. The aircraft jolted. Ethan gritted his teeth. "This is too tight. We can't hover safely." "Hover?" Mara snapped, teeth clenched. "We don't hover, we land where others can't." The storm howled in response, rain pelting the windshield, lightning illuminating the jagged terrain in stark white flashes. She guided the jet lower, inches from rocks, aiming for a narrow ridge adjacent to the wreck. No margin for error, no space for hesitation. A deafening crack echoed as a branch of rock broke loose below, tumbling toward the aircraft. Mara reacted instinctively, lifting slightly, shifting forward, riding the turbulence like a wave. Ethan's hands flew across controls. "We're not going to." But Mara cut him off with a sharp look. "Watch and learn." The ridge approached, narrow, treacherous, imperfect, life or death in every square inch. She felt the weight of history pressing down, the memories of lives lost when someone waited for permission. She would not wait. The plane dipped, wheels scraping mud and jagged stone as the jet barely kissed the ridge. Sparks flew. Metal groaned. Passengers screamed inside, unaware of how close to the edge they were. Mara held steady, balancing on instinct and experience, praying the engines wouldn't stall, that momentum would carry them forward, that physics would bend just enough to let life survive. The medical pilot below looked up, eyes wide, disbelief flashing. He moved to help the patient, stumbling against the wreckage, uncertain, desperate. Mara saw him, saw them both, and realized even now she couldn't touch them. She could only deliver them a chance. The ridge trembled under the plane's weight. The engines roared, protesting. Rain cascaded down windows, lightning illuminating the twisted wreck, the human struggle, the impossibility of what was happening. Ethan's voice barely rose above the storm. "Captain, we may not get another chance if we fail." Mara exhaled through gritted teeth. Failure isn't an option. The aircraft lurched, dangerously close to tipping, but she corrected, sliding forward across the ridge, inch by agonizing inch. Below, the faint light of the beacon pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. She could almost feel the desperation, the fragile hope, the fear that if they didn't succeed, someone would die alone in the storm. Then in a heartbeat the plane settled. Wheels grounded on mud and rock. Tremors shook the fuselage. Sparks flew as metal kissed stone. Ethan and Mara held their breath. They had made it, for now. But the storm was not done, not by a long shot. Because just beyond the ridge, hidden in shadow and rain, something moved, something alive, something that had been waiting. And Mara's instincts screamed, getting here was only the beginning. The beacon flickered one last time, and then went dark. Silence enveloped the cockpit. And for the first time in minutes, Mara realized the hardest part hadn't started yet. The lives below depended entirely on her next move. And what she did next would either save them all or leave the impossible undone. Mara sat in the cockpit for a fraction of a second, letting her pulse slow, though the storm outside refused to relent. The faint glimmer of the emergency beacon had vanished, swallowed by darkness, rain, and shadowed peaks. She glanced at Ethan. His face was pale, taut with a mixture of awe, fear, and disbelief. "It's gone," he whispered. "They could be." "Alive," Mara interrupted firmly. "Or dying. We're not leaving without knowing which." Her voice carried a steel that belied exhaustion, one honed through years of impossible missions, secret flights, and survival situations that left no room for hesitation. Below, jagged cliffs rose like black teeth, jagged ridges slicing the stormy sky. Trees shook violently in the wind, rain pounding their branches until every leaf was a blur. Somewhere down there, the pilot of the downed medical transport and his patient waited, fragile and fatting. Mara's eyes scanned the terrain. No landing strip, no flat valley, no escape hatch offered by convenience, only raw geography and sheer necessity. Ethan's fingers hovered nervously above his own controls. "Captain, this terrain, it's insane. Any attempt to land could kill us," Mara finished. "I know," she exhaled. Her mind raced through every scenario, skidding off the ridge, clipping a jagged rock, losing momentum, a miscalculation killing everyone. But then she remembered why she was here. The injured. The faint beacon that had flickered, almost pleading in the storm. She had no choice. She leaned closer to the yoke, eyes narrowing. The jet vibrated under the force of the storm, wings slicing through violent gusts. Instruments warned her, systems protested, alarms blared like frantic voices in the dark. But her hands moved as if they belonged to someone else entirely, someone who had landed in worse places with less visibility, someone who had flown where rules didn't exist. The ridge ahead appeared again, barely illuminated through sheets of rain and lightning flashes. Mud, rock, and scattered debris marked what might be the only surface to make contact with. Mara adjusted throttle and flaps. Every calculation was instantaneous. Wind speed, descent angle, lift, thrust, momentum. She made it clear to Ethan with a glance. No hesitation. The plane dipped lower. The engines roared. Lightning illuminated the twisted wreck below, the medical transport mangled against jagged rocks, its fuselage groaning with structural stress. Mara felt her stomach clench. The pilot and patient were visible now, struggling, exhausted, soaked by the relentless storm. "Stay steady," she instructed. "We're not here to crash, we're here to save lives." Ethan gritted his teeth, eyes wide, adrenaline pulsing through his veins. "Captain, there's barely space. If we misjudge." "We won't misjudge," she said. The jet brushed the ridge. Sparks erupted as metal kissed stone. Mud sprayed across the fuselage. Mara kept it steady, sliding forward with precision. The engines roared against gravity and wind, carrying them inch by inch. She could feel the plane responding to her, the power of the engines barely enough to fight the forces around them. Every second was a gamble, every fraction of a mile an eternity. Below, the medical pilot's eyes widened as he caught sight of the aircraft. Relief, disbelief, and panic collided in his gaze. He tried to stabilize the stretcher, trying to move the patient toward a safer spot, but the rain and mud made every movement treacherous. Mara saw them both, humanity on the edge, fragile against nature. "Ethan," she said softly, "we're close. Be ready for the next move." The jet lurched suddenly as a powerful gust hit from the side. Mara countered immediately, leaning with the motion, flaps angled, engines throttled. Metal groaned. Red lights flashed. Ethan shouted, but she didn't hear him over the roar. Only the faint pleading echo of life below guided her decisions. Then came another complication. The ridge was narrower than anticipated. Trees jutted from rocky soil, limbs snapping under the storm's fury. Mara adjusted descent, skimming just above the tallest branches. One miscalculation, one slip in judgment, and the jet would collide catastrophically. She felt sweat streaking her face under the helmet. Her pulse hammered in rhythm with the storm. But her eyes never left the wreck below. She could see the pilot and patient now, faint and shivering, illuminated by the occasional lightning flash. The patient's oxygen mask was loose, the pilot struggling to hold him steady. "Ready for extraction?" Mara asked. Ethan's voice was barely audible. "If we try, the jet might." "Do it anyway," Mara said, calm but forceful. "We save lives or nothing else matters." The aircraft descended carefully, sliding onto a sloped ridge, wheels kicking up mud, scraping rock and threatening every second to lose traction. Sparks flew, metal screeched against stone. Behind them, passengers screamed as turbulence battered the cabin, but Mara's focus didn't waver. A flash of lightning illuminated the broken transport fully. Mara's stomach tightened at the sight of twisted metal and shattered windows. She could see the pilot, wet, exhausted, clinging to the patient, desperation etched across both faces. "Hold on," she whispered, "we're here." The jet inched forward, dragging across the slope with careful precision. Mud and rocks scraped against tires, but it held. The engine screamed, fighting the storm. Mara could feel the vibrations, every quiver of the fuselage like a warning. She leaned into the controls, hands steady, guiding them closer. Ethan's voice trembled. "Captain, if we do this wrong, They die," Mara said simply. Her tone carried no fear, only resolve. The ridge narrowed further. One side a steep drop, the other a wall of jagged rocks. She aligned the jet as close as possible to the wreck, wheels teetering on the uneven mud. The engines hummed in protest, every vibration a reminder of how fragile their position was. The medical pilot below stumbled. The patient gasped, weak and terrified. Mara's eyes locked on them and she made the decision. "Hold the stretcher tight," she instructed. "We're coming as close as we can." Another gust slammed the aircraft. Ethan countered, flaps adjusting instinctively. Sparks flew. Red alarms blared. The storm tore at them with every ounce of fury it possessed. And then a heartbeat of silence. The jet rested precariously. Wheels dug into mud. Metal shivered against rocks. Outside, rain hammered the ridge, lightning illuminating the impossible scene in stark, ghostly flashes. Mara leaned forward, knowing the next move would define life or death. She looked at Ethan. "Ready." He nodded, face pale, hand tight on his console. She exhaled, gripping the yoke. The wind screamed. The ridge waited. Below, life waited. The impossible was about to begin. And then movement from the darkness. Something shifting beyond the wreck, barely visible through rain and shadow. Mara's heart skipped a beat. Someone or something was approaching. The storm roared, the aircraft trembled. And just as she braced for the next maneuver, a voice, faint, broken, human, cried out from the wreck. "Help, please." The impossible had a sound, and it was calling them directly. The moment froze Mara's mind. The broken voice, raw, trembling, desperate, cut through the storm like a knife. The medical pilot, drenched and bleeding, was shouting for help while trying to keep the patient stable. The patient gasped, oxygen mask slipping as his chest rose and fell weakly against the wind and rain. Mara's throat tightened. This wasn't a drill. This wasn't training. This was raw life and death, seconds from slipping beyond reach. Ethan's voice was tight. "Captain, the ridge, there's barely enough room, we could." "We will," Mara interrupted, voice low and unwavering. "We're going to land where no plane should ever go. Ready." He swallowed, gripping his console. I don't know if this is even possible." She ignored him. Possibility didn't matter. Survival did. The engine screamed as she nudged the plane forward, skimming over the narrow ridge. Mud, loose rock, and scattered branches threatened to throw them off balance with every inch. Lightning flared, illuminating the wreck below in ghost-white flashes. The pilot's gaze met hers for a split second. Hope, fear, relief, desperation, all at once. Mara adjusted the throttles, balancing weight distribution, banking slightly to avoid jagged rocks. Sparks erupted from the fuselage, scraping against stone. The ridge beneath them shuddered as if the earth itself doubted their presence. The jet's tires bit into the mud, slipping slightly, but Mara countered instinctively, using every ounce of skill she had mastered over years of impossible flights. "Move carefully," she said, calm but forceful. "We need to get close enough for them to reach us." Ethan's hands flew over his controls, keeping the aircraft as stable as possible. Every warning light screamed, alarms bellowed, turbulence roared like a living predator. But Mara's gaze never wavered. Her eyes tracked the pilot struggling below, the patient gasping, and the narrow gap between their world and total disaster. The jet inched forward, inches. Seconds stretched into eternity. The engine strained against gravity, wind, and mud. Sparks flew from every point where metal met stone. The cabin shuddered violently, passengers clinging to seats, unaware of the true danger outside their windows. Mara's knuckles whitened on the yoke, every muscle tensed, every breath measured. Below, the medical pilot tried to move the stretcher closer to what he hoped was a safe spot. He stumbled, mud slipping beneath his boots, rain blinding him. The patient coughed weakly, his body trembling, his oxygen mask hanging loose. Mara's chest tightened. One misstep here and it would all be over. "Steady," she whispered to herself and to the storm. "We can do this." The ridge narrowed. Trees jutted from the mud like claws, limbs snapping in the wind. Mara angled the jet precisely, skimming branches while keeping wheels as stable as possible. Sparks erupted as metal kissed rock. Each inch forward was a battle, each heartbeat a gamble. The pilot below noticed the aircraft's proximity, eyes widening in disbelief. That's how," he shouted over the storm, voice almost lost in thunder. "We're landing where others would never try," Mara muttered, focusing entirely on her target. The jet slid forward, scraping mud and rock, inches from the jagged cliff. The engines roared, protesting. Ethan's voice cracked. "This is insane. One miscalculation." "I know," Mara said, voice tight but controlled. "We don't get miscalculations." Lightning flashed, illuminating the pilot and patient. Mara's gaze locked on them. They were alive, but only just. One more wrong move and time would run out. The aircraft trembled under the storm's fury, and the ridge seemed to shrink with every passing second. "Prepare for extraction," Mara shouted, leaning forward. Ethan nodded, eyes wide, sweat streaking his face. "Ready." The medical pilot below struggled to lift the patient toward a more stable portion of the ridge. Mud and debris threatened to send them sliding off the slope. Mara's fingers gripped the yoke tighter, heart pounding, every muscle straining to maintain balance. The jet inched closer, sparks flew, metal screeched against stone, rain lashed against windows, the engines screamed in protest. And then a sudden gust slammed the aircraft. Wheels slipped on mud. The fuselage tilted dangerously. Ethan reacted instantly, adjusting controls, but the ridge was merciless. Mara leaned into the motion, countering, guiding, balancing on instinct. The plane shuddered violently but did not topple. "Almost there," Mara whispered, teeth clenched. The pilot below caught sight of the wheels, realized the aircraft was close enough. He lunged, mud and rain slowing him, but determination propelling him. He grabbed the stretcher, dragging the patient toward the jet's open cargo hatch. Mara's heart pounded. The engine screamed, the storm roared, metal screeched, but she held steady. Inches away from catastrophe, she balanced the impossible. The ridge trembled beneath them, sparks flew. One misstep, one slip would send everything tumbling into the storm below. The pilot shouted over the wind, "We're almost there." The patient gasped, eyes wide, barely conscious. Mara exhaled, focusing every ounce of strength, every skill honed over years of secret missions, every instinct that told her to save lives no matter the cost. The stretcher reached the jet, hands gripped handles. The pilot and patient struggled, mud and rain threatening to topple them. Mara's pulse thundered. Ethan's hands were steady, though fear laced his movements. And then the patient was inside, safe, barely conscious but alive. The pilot scrambled aboard next, drenched, exhausted, bleeding, disbelief etched across his face. He looked at Mara. Words failed him. The storm wasn't finished yet. The ridge trembled. The aircraft was barely stable. Engines roared, sparks flew. Lightning split the sky. Mara exhaled, voice steady, though adrenaline coursed through her veins. "We're not done yet." Ethan's eyes widened. Getting out is going to be worse than getting in. Mara didn't answer. She only looked ahead at the storm, the narrow ridge, and the impossible path that still lay before them. And high above, in a sky torn by wind and lightning, the impossible flight had just begun. Because the storm wasn't finished. The ridge wasn't finished. And every second that passed brought them closer to either salvation or disaster. A shadow moved across the slope below. Something or someone was still out there. Mara's pulse tightened. Her hands gripped the yoke. The next move would decide everything. And what came next could either save them all or leave the impossible undone. The cockpit was a storm of alarms, vibrations, and tension. Mara's fingers remained locked on the yoke, every adjustment deliberate, precise. The engines groaned under the impossible demands of the ridge. Mud, jagged rocks, and trees pressed on every side, testing the limits of metal, momentum, and human resolve. She glanced at Ethan. His face was pale, eyes wide, jaw tight. He began, but she cut him off. No hesitation. We lift or we lose everything. The storm lashed around them, rain pounding like bullets, lightning illuminating the jagged cliff in stark, fleeting flashes. The medics and patient were aboard, safe, for now, but the ridge beneath them was barely holding. One slip, one miscalculation, and the jet could tumble off into the storm-racked valley below. Mara exhaled slowly, steadying her racing pulse. Years of secret rescue missions, covert flights through mountains, and impossible landings had prepared her for this. Not for recognition, not for glory, only for life or death, measured in heartbeats and inches of metal against rock. "Engines at full thrust," she murmured, gripping the controls as if merging with the plane itself. Ethan adjusted the secondary throttles. "Hold it steady. Ridge conditions aren't ideal." Mara leaned forward. Her mind calculated. Weight distribution, engine capacity, mud traction, turbulence, wind shear, all converging into a singular, impossible maneuver. Her eyes flicked to the patient, barely conscious, and the medic beside him, clinging to hope like a fragile lifeline. A gust slammed the plane. Wheels slipped in the mud. Sparks flew where metal met stone. The fuselage trembled violently. Ethan's hands flew over his instruments, adjusting stabilizers. Mara countered instantly, tilting the wings slightly, throttling precisely. The plane shivered under their combined control. Below, the pilot of the medevac plane, soaking wet and exhausted, watched in awe as the aircraft defied every expectation of physics. Every second was a battle against nature itself. Trees snapped in the wind. Rocks tumbled below, reminding Mara of what would happen if a single miscalculation occurred. "Engage upward lift," Mara commanded, her voice calm but firm. Ethan followed, throttles screaming as the engine strained, smoke curling faintly from overworked turbines. The jet rose a fraction, skimming above the mud, leaving the patient and medic safe inside. The only thing preventing catastrophe, the raw skill of the pilot and the strength of the engines. Lightning flashed, illuminating the impossible scene. Mara could see the storm stretching endlessly, jagged mountains piercing the black sky. Her heart pounded, but she remained focused. No margin for error existed. She had seconds, maybe less, to clear the ridge entirely. A low rumble vibrated through the aircraft. Thunder, or the ridge giving way. Mara ignored the panic clawing at the edges of her consciousness. She adjusted flaps, fine-tuned the throttles, leaned into the turbulence. Every movement was a dialogue between human instinct and mechanical obedience. "Ethan, hold her steady," Mara said. "We're coming up, we're almost clear." The jet climbed precariously, wheels still brushing mud, sparks flying from scraping rock. Gusts slammed the plane. Ethan shouted instructions, coordinating with precision, though his hands shook slightly. Mara's focus never wavered. She had done this before, yes, but never with passengers above her, never with lives added to the balance like weights on a precarious scale. Above the ridge, lightning illuminated a narrow opening. Enough room to escape, but only if they acted perfectly. One wrong move, one twitch of wind, one overcorrection, and they would plunge into the valley below. Mara counted in her head. 1, 2, 3 seconds of perfect alignment. She adjusted yaw, throttled engines in unison, and lifted carefully, wings slicing through rain, mud, and debris. Sparks flew from wheels scraping stone. Ethan's voice was tense. "We're not stable, any slip." "We're stable enough," Mara said. Her tone left no room for doubt. "Now full upward lift." The engine screamed, vibrating under the strain, but the aircraft obeyed. Slowly, agonizingly, the jet climbed above the ridge. Mud sprayed below, rain whipped the fuselage, lightning split the clouds. The pilot of the medevac inside exhaled, relief crashing over him like waves. Passengers, unaware of how close death had grazed them, felt turbulence but not the truth. Mara and Ethan knew better. Every inch gained had been bought with skill, instinct, and nerve. Then came the next challenge, clearing the mountains entirely. The storm was not done. Wind gusts shifted, rain fell in sheets, lightning exploded in blinding arcs. Mara tilted the plane, banking into turbulence, trusting her instincts over failing instruments. The radar flickered erratically. Instrument panels warned of altitude issues, mechanical strain, and potential engine failure. Mara ignored most warnings, relying on the raw data from her eyes, the storm's feedback, and the way the aircraft responded to her touch. A low, grinding noise erupted from below. The ridge trembled, rocks fell, trees snapped. The ground was unstable. Mara's pulse surged. One misstep now and everything could collapse. "Ethan, we need to punch through the storm," she said, determination cutting through exhaustion. "Throttle to max. Climb angle 35 degrees. Full climb now." Ethan followed, throttles screaming, stabilizers straining. The aircraft responded, rising precariously above the ridge. Wind tore at the fuselage, but the combination of human skill and mechanical endurance began to pay off. Below, rain pounded rocks and mud. The pilot and patient huddled inside, shaking, drenched but alive. Mara saw their eyes through the haze, a brief connection that said everything words could not. They trusted her and she would not fail. But the storm was relentless. Lightning struck dangerously close. Thunder shook the air like a hammer. Gusts threatened to topple them sideways. Every second brought new peril. The plane trembled violently. Alarms screamed. Engines strained. The ridge threatened to swallow them whole if they faltered. Mara's hands burned, every muscle tight, every nerve alight. Then a sudden calm, a narrow window. Just long enough to maneuver, just long enough to climb clear of immediate danger. "Now," Mara said sharply. Ethan pushed the throttles forward, stabilizers balanced. The jet climbed. Mud and rocks fell away beneath them. Sparks faded. The engines roared as if triumphing alongside them. For a heartbeat it was silent. No alarms, no wind, no chaos, just controlled flight through sheets of storm. Mara exhaled, but only slightly. She knew better. The storm had not surrendered. The mountains had not relinquished their grip. The aircraft was battered, systems overworked, the ridge behind them a reminder of fragility. Ethan leaned back, wiping sweat from his brow. "Captain, I can't believe we—" "Don't celebrate yet," Mara said. "We're still not safe." Through the windshield, she could see more dark clouds ahead, lightning slicing jagged lines. The storm was a living thing, and it was still hungry. Below, shadows moved in the darkened valleys, remnants of the wrecked medical transport scattered by rain and wind. Mara's heart clenched. Every second counted. Every choice mattered. The patient's survival depended on their next move. One mistake now would erase the lives they had fought to save. She tightened her grip on the yoke. Every warning, every alarm, every gust of wind was part of the challenge. Every second was a test of instinct, experience, and courage. And above all, Mara knew one truth: the impossible was not finished. Because as they climbed toward tenuous safety, lightning flashed again, and the storm revealed another obstacle, something moving in the shadows of the valley below. Something alive. And it was coming for them. The storm showed no mercy. Mara's knuckles were white on the yoke, her jaw tight, as the jet climbed precariously above the jagged ridge. Lightning split the sky, momentarily exposing the valley below, a scene of devastation, mud, broken trees, and the crumpled remains of the medevac aircraft. Inside, the rescued pilot and patient gasped, shivering, wet, barely conscious. Mara exhaled slowly, knowing every second counted. Every movement, every inch, could mean the difference between life and death. Ethan's voice broke through the storm's roar. "Captain, the terrain isn't clear. You're climbing, but there's a drop-off ahead. Rocks, trees, one wrong angle, and we're gone." "I know," Mara said quietly, her eyes scanning instruments and horizon simultaneously. "Hold steady. We're not done yet." The pilot inside the medevac slumped against the fuselage, drenched, exhausted, terrified. His eyes found Mara's through the cockpit window, a mixture of disbelief and hope. She gave him a small nod. No words were needed, they understood each other perfectly. Lives were precariously balanced in the storm's merciless grasp. Outside, wind clawed at the plane, each gust threatening to push them off course. Rain lashed the fuselage, obscuring vision, making every maneuver a test of precision and nerve. Mara leaned into the controls, coaxing the jet through turbulence that would have grounded any other pilot. Every fiber of her being was engaged. Every ounce of training, instinct, and experience screamed for focus. Ethan monitored systems frantically. "Engines are overtaxed. We're hitting limits on lift and throttle. If we push further, one miscalculation." "We don't get miscalculations," Mara interrupted, voice sharp, unwavering. She adjusted flaps and throttles in harmony, balancing the aircraft against the storm's violent assault. Sparks flew where metal scraped rock during their precarious ascent. A crackling boom of thunder shook the fuselage. Passengers in the cabin gasped, clinging to their seats. Mara's gaze flicked briefly toward them, then back to the storm outside. She knew panic could paralyze, but fear was already a constant companion. The only thing she could do was act. Below, the ridge dropped sharply into the valley. Trees bent violently under the wind, rocks tumbled, mud slid in sheets toward the abyss. The medevac pilot struggled to stabilize himself and the patient, gripping the stretcher as rain threatened to send it sliding. Mara watched every movement, calculating risk, distance, and timing. "Prepare for extraction," she said calmly. Ethan nodded, eyes wide. "Ready, but this is insane. There's barely room." "We adapt," Mara cut in. "We survive, just hold her steady." The jet inched forward, tires scraping mud, wings brushing tree limbs. Sparks flew, alarms screamed, engines roared, but the aircraft obeyed. Mara's hands were extensions of the plane itself, guiding it carefully along the narrow ridge, inch by agonizing inch. Below, the medevac pilot lunged, dragging the patient toward the plane. Rain blinded him, mud slicked the slope, yet he pressed on. The patient coughed weakly, shivering violently, oxygen mask slipping. Mara's heart pounded, knowing every moment counted. The ridge narrowed further. One side a vertical cliff, the other jagged rocks and snapping trees. Mara tilted the jet, nudging forward, balancing precariously. The engines screamed under stress. Every warning light flared. Every vibration reminded her of the razor's edge they walked. The pilot below reached the jet. Hands grasped the fuselage, pulling the stretcher up. Mara held the aircraft steady. Ethan adjusted controls perfectly, synchronizing with her movements. Sparks flew. The plane shuddered. Mud and debris scattered beneath. The storm roared, yet they held. Inside the medevac, the patient's eyes fluttered open, weak but alive. Relief washed over the pilot's face, mingled with disbelief. He looked up at Mara's cockpit, as if seeking reassurance that survival was real. Mara nodded, hands still locked on the yoke. The final challenge loomed, lifting clear of the ridge entirely. The storm was relentless. Wind gusts shifted unpredictably. Lightning struck perilously close. The ridge offered no mercy. Mara exhaled, counting seconds, measuring angles, throttling engines, tilting wings. "Full lift now," she commanded. Ethan complied, throttles screaming. The jet strained against gravity, mud, and wind, rising precariously above the ridge. Sparks flew from scraping wheels. The engines roared. The fuselage vibrated violently. Passengers held their breath, unaware of the life-and-death drama unfolding outside their view. Above the ridge, lightning illuminated a narrow path, enough to escape, but only if executed perfectly. Mara adjusted yaw, throttled precisely, and lifted the plane, inches then feet above the ridge. The storm battered them, but the aircraft obeyed. Ethan's voice cracked. "We're clear for now." Mara exhaled, though her pulse raced. The storm hadn't surrendered. The mountains hadn't yielded. Systems were overtaxed, alarms still blaring. Below, the medevac pilot and patient clung to life, grateful, exhausted. Mara's eyes swept across the scene, knowing every second still mattered. Then movement. Shadows shifted in the storm-drenched valley below. Another life, another survivor, or perhaps a threat, was approaching. Mara's instincts screamed at her. She adjusted the plane, preparing for the unknown. "Brace yourself," she whispered to Ethan. "We're not done yet." The storm's fury intensified. Rain turned to sheets, wind howled, lightning split the sky. Mara's hands gripped the controls. Every calculation, every instinct, every ounce of experience pushed the plane higher, faster, steadier. And then through the chaos, a faint light flickered below. Another beacon, or just reflection from debris. Mara's eyes narrowed, scanning. The pulse was irregular, desperate. Someone else. Another person in need. Ethan's voice trembled. "Captain, we can't stay here. Fuel's low, engines." "We stay as long as we need," Mara replied, voice calm but firm. "Someone down there is still alive. That's all that matters." The jet climbed higher, engines screaming, wings slicing through gusts, rain pelting glass. Sparks from the ridge faded as the plane finally cleared the worst of the immediate terrain, but the storm still raged. Lightning lit the sky like a battlefield. Below, the valley waited, dark and treacherous. Shadows moved. The medevac pilot and patient were safe for now, but Mara knew every second mattered. Survival depended on her next choice. The impossible had not ended. It was only escalating. And as she guided the jet through the storm, heart pounding, mind laser-focused, she realized the real test was still ahead. Because above the valley, in the shadows of the storm, the next challenge waited. Something or someone was coming for them. And Mara Collins knew that every second from now on would decide who lived and who didn't. The storm raged as if the sky itself were determined to punish them for daring to intervene. Mara tightened her grip on the yoke, eyes scanning the jagged peaks, the churning clouds, and the faint flicker of another beacon far below. One life already saved, another calling out in desperation. Her instincts screamed that time was collapsing, seconds stretching and snapping all at once. "Ethan," she said, voice sharp and calm over the roar, "we're going in, keep her steady. This is the last approach." He swallowed hard, nodding. "Understood, but the instruments, half offline, engines maxed, wind." "We adapt," Mara interrupted. There was no room for doubt, no hesitation, only action. Below, the valley opened slightly, still jagged and treacherous, strewn with mud, rock, and broken tree limbs. The faint beacon flickered like a heartbeat in the darkness. Mara tracked it meticulously, gauging distance, altitude, wind speed, and every other variable her mind could calculate in milliseconds. The jet dipped slightly, wings cutting through violent gusts, rain slapping the fuselage like 100 fists. Sparks erupted as tires scraped stone. Mara held her breath as the aircraft inched forward, every millimeter a gamble. The medevac pilot from the earlier rescue looked up from the back, eyes wide with awe and terror. "I can't believe you're actually doing this," he muttered. "We have to," Mara replied, without taking her eyes from the controls. Another gust slammed the plane from the side, twisting it violently. Alarms screamed. Ethan countered with rapid adjustments, stabilizers quivering under the strain. Mara leaned into the turbulence, tilting wings just enough to maintain control. Sparks flew from scraping metal, rain soaked the fuselage, and the wind threatened to push them off course entirely. Below, the beacon blinked weakly. The signal was faint, almost fading entirely. Mara's pulse surged. Whoever was down there had only moments left. If she failed now, this person could die alone in the storm, lost among the jagged rocks and mudslides. Altitude dropping, Ethan said, tension in his voice. We need to lift. I know, Mara interrupted. Just a little closer. The aircraft crept over the uneven terrain. Mud and water sprayed from beneath the wheels. Branches whipped against the fuselage, metal screeched. Lightning illuminated the wreckage of another vehicle nearby, a reminder of the stakes, of what could happen if they faltered. And then she saw him, a lone figure, soaked and trembling, waving weakly toward the aircraft. Mara's chest tightened. The pilot struggled against the mud, dragging what appeared to be an injured hiker, their arms shaking from exhaustion and fear. Ethan, she whispered, voice tight, this is it, we have to get them. He nodded, eyes wide. Ready. Mara adjusted the throttle, nudging the jet forward carefully. Every inch counted. Sparks flew where metal scraped stone. Gusts threatened to tip the aircraft. The engines roared, straining, and alarms shrieked in warning. The hiker below stumbled, mud sucking at their boots. The injured person they carried gasped weakly, barely conscious. Mara's hands were steady, voice calm, breathing measured, even as adrenaline screamed in her veins. Hold the stretcher tight, she instructed through the comms, though she knew the pilot couldn't hear her fully. We're right here. The aircraft inched closer, tilting just enough to allow access. Ethan adjusted stabilizers, balancing the jet against the uneven ridge. Sparks flew, metal groaned, rain splashed violently. The storm was relentless, but Mara's focus never wavered. The figure below made it to the edge of the mudslide, struggling to maintain balance. Mara nudged the aircraft forward, engine roar masking her instructions. Inches separated them from disaster. And then by sheer force of will they made it. Hands grasped the fuselage. The injured hiker was lifted into the jet, trembling, soaked, but alive. Relief washed through Mara's chest, fleeting but intense. Next, she said quietly, never letting the adrenaline fade. The lone rescuer below scrambled, exhausted, mud-covered but determined. Mara guided the jet closer, balancing delicately. The final figure climbed aboard, falling into the fuselage, grateful, terrified, alive. The engine screamed as she pushed for clearance. The ridge behind them was barely visible, jagged and treacherous. Lightning cracked overhead, rain lashed the fuselage. Sparks flew from contact with rock. Mara adjusted the yoke, tilting wings, throttling engines, and slowly climbing above the storm. Ethan exhaled shakily. We're clear, he whispered. Mara didn't relax yet. The storm wasn't done. Systems were taxed, instruments unreliable, engines near maximum capacity. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the mountains in stark white flashes. Below, the valleys waited, silent and menacing. She guided the jet steadily, climbing higher, away from immediate danger. The rescued pilot and patients in the back huddled together, shivering, eyes wide but alive. The medevac pilot's gaze found Mara, gratitude and disbelief etched in every line of his soaked, tired face. You saved us, he whispered, voice breaking. Mara's jaw relaxed slightly. We're not done, she said, scanning ahead. The storm still roared, but the worst of the terrain had passed. Ethan exhaled, tension slowly leaving his shoulders. I can't believe that worked. Mara allowed herself a brief smile. It did, but we've got a storm to outrun. Above them, clouds roared and lightning danced across the sky. The engine strained, but Mara's hands were steady. The passengers, unaware of the full magnitude, held on, feeling turbulence but not understanding the lives hanging by inches outside their window. She adjusted flaps, stabilized altitude, and guided the jet toward safer skis. Slowly, steadily, the storm began to relent, the clouds thinning. Lightning faded. Rain lessened. Visibility improved. The mountains, once monstrous and threatening, began to fade behind them. Below in the valley, emergency crews were already arriving, alerted by the faint beacon that had guided Mara. They rushed to the scene, but the danger had passed. Lives had been saved by skill, courage, and sheer determination. Mara glanced at Ethan. "We did it." He nodded, voice hoarse. "You saved them all." The rescued hiker and the medevac pilot looked out the window, disbelief and gratitude etched in their faces. One whispered softly, words lost in the roar of the remaining storm, but their eyes said it all. They were alive. Mara exhaled, finally allowing herself to relax. The storm was behind them. The ridge was behind them. The impossible mission was complete. For a moment, silence filled the cockpit. Not the calm of peace, but the exhausted stillness of survival. Mara's hands loosened on the yoke. She looked down at the valley, the remnants of chaos, and knew every second of tension, every split-second decision had been worth it. Ethan finally allowed himself a laugh, shaky, incredulous. "I don't know how you did that." Mara smiled faintly. "I didn't. The plane, the storm, the team, they all did their part. I just made sure no one got left behind." The passengers behind them cheered softly as the turbulence eased, unaware of the near-death ballet that had just occurred. Mara allowed herself a small, satisfied nod. She had flown into the impossible and had flown out with everyone alive. As they leveled off into safer airspace, Mara allowed her mind to wander briefly to the lives saved, the faces, the terror, the relief. She thought of the pilot's eyes, the hiker's trembling hands, the patient barely conscious but breathing. She thought of the storm that had tested everything she had. And then she thought of what came next. The world would never know. The storm would rage elsewhere. The ridge would remain dangerous. But somewhere, someone was alive because she had chosen to act when everyone else hesitated. Mara leaned back in her seat, eyes forward, hands finally loosening on the yoke. The impossible mission was over. The storm was behind them, and for the first time in hours, she allowed herself to breathe. The radio crackled. A familiar voice came through, urgent, relieved. "Flight 429, do you copy? Status." Mara smiled faintly. "We're safe, everyone's safe. Repeat, everyone is safe." For the first time, she allowed herself a moment of quiet triumph. The impossible had been achieved. Lives had been saved. And somewhere far below, the faint glimmer of hope had been restored. The storm had tested her. The mountains had challenged her. Nature had thrown everything at her. And she had prevailed. But Mara knew this was only one story of survival, one flight among countless others. Somewhere else, the world would demand the impossible again. She exhaled, calm now, ready for whatever came next. The impossible, after all, was never finished.